Colin and I are going to be splitting the time tonight. I'll be talking first, and then Colin will talk about his work. What we're doing is related, but also kind of separate, which we'll try to explain. And then we want to leave a nice bit of time at the end for Q&A. I expect with this topic, there might be lots of Q&A. I hope there will be. Also, please feel free to jump in and don't wait till I'm done talking at the end of my segment. If you have questions at any point, please let us know. I'm happy to try to answer them. I'm seeing, this just feels so amazing. I've seen guys here that I haven't seen for a long time that actually took the early versions of the course I'm going to be talking about tonight. In fact, I'm seeing a couple of guys. I think I'm right. There's Tom and Kyle, Tyler, Joe. I see you guys too, maybe others. Kyle and Tom were in the very first, I'm pretty sure the very first time I ever taught games at the college. Kyle Cassidy and Tom Bleach were in that class. So special hello to you guys. It's great to have you here. Hey.
Good to see you, Professor.
Yes, good to see you. And thanks for being here. So I'm going to talk a bit, and I'm going to share my screen, give you a sense of kind of the background of how we first started introducing games and interactive media. And I want to be careful about the terminology, because not everything that we do is a game, and what even a game means, and what are the conditions required to have a game or to call an interactive experience a game. Maybe that thing I'm teaching or I'm talking about is an interactive designed experience that may or may not have a game element to it or a win-loss state attributed to it. So, just the fact that we're calling it games from the first step is even a little tricky. But anyway, we'll talk more about that, I think. All right, I'm going to share my screen and talk a little bit about where this all comes from and what we're doing now. All right, can you all see this? Is my screen sharing okay?
Looks good.
Okay, good. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about sort of how we got to where we are now, and I won't spend too much time on it, but I want to go back to like roughly 2007 when the momentum for this course that I teach now, and what Colin arrived at a little later, how it all kind of started. Anybody know what we're looking at here on the screen, what that is? This was designed by a student a few years ago. Hopefully you can see that is a Minecraft version of Wabash College. This particular student, and I'll talk about him more in a little bit, built out the entire campus inside Minecraft, and then did something very clever with it. Like I said, I'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, so I started a website and a podcast back in 2007, and it ran for like 7 years. It was called Brainygamer, and I wrote, I don't know how many articles, but many articles over time. I averaged about 2 or 3 a week for about 6 years. It kind of tailed off in the 7th year as Wabash started to sort of, my focus at Wabash changed, and I had more responsibilities at the college. It was also a podcast. And for most of its time, it was the highest ranked single author website devoted to video games in the world. That's sounds like a big claim. There really weren't very many single author websites devoted to video games in 2007. But it gathered a lot of momentum, and it also enabled me to travel a lot. And for many years, I attended and still occasionally attend the Game Developers Conference in San Francisco, which is where all of the game designers who are in the game design industry, the major companies, but also the indie developers, which were more interesting to me at the time, they all converge on San Francisco for about a week. And it's just a lot of show and tell and sharing and explaining. It's an amazing experience. The other thing I'll just note is that Wabash got a little bright light shining on it during a period of time when we started offering games at the college, and we really were pioneering this. That article you can see on the lower right is there were a bunch of those kinds of things in Wired magazine and other places about us offering a game called Portal on the syllabus of the one of the very first editions of EQ, which used to be C&T for some of you older folks. And it just got a lot of play around the national media, and it was an interesting kind of way for us to sort of let people know what we were doing at the college. And it definitely got the attention of Greg Hess. Greg Hess arrived at the college, and he immediately began thinking about what later became known as these Wabash X initiatives. And they were initiatives like the Global Health Initiative, the Democracy Project that Sarah Drury works on, and the Digital Arts Initiative, which is what he wanted me to work on. And ultimately, the momentum behind that was given a big boost by the Mellon Foundation, who gave us a grant to build this out into a course and a set of experiences that we could offer students that really had some oomph behind it, and that would sort of build out what I had been doing on a very simple level. Tom and Kyle can tell you it was a freshman tutorial. It was really nothing more. It was just an attempt to try to sort of see if it was possible to teach this subject with students. And it grew into something which is now a minor at the college. It's now the Film and Digital Media minor. And that minor, by the way, has 36 students in it, which is within 5 years, it's one of the biggest minors at the college. It's tremendously exciting to see so many students interested in film and digital media and sort of what's come out of this project. So that's kind of what happened next. And the impetus really for the minor was, how can we channel the experiences that students are having in a growing number of courses and build them into something that would give them genuinely rigorous experiences, Wabash-like experiences in the classroom, and how could they then carry those with them forward into their careers? Three things I'll just mention that we can point to that were sort of immediately the result of the Mellon grant. One was this new course. It's a regularly offered every spring. I'm offering it this spring, Theater 208, which is a game design course. And the man you see in the middle there, if the picture, is Brett Duville. And the grant allowed me to bring Brett, who's a good friend, to campus, and he co-taught the first version of the course with me, which was just amazing and pivotal in terms of how I understood what needed to be done with the course. And I learned a lot from him. Brett was the lead developer on the Elder Scrolls Skyrim, a little game that a few people played, and also many other games. He goes back to the LucasArts days in those LucasArts games. And he came to the college to work with me and the students on developing the first version of the class. And that then resulted in an idea that he and I thought was an important way of culminating the course. And it was an event called Game Jam, where the students built games that were self-contained and hosted them at kiosks over in the Detchen Center. And each student's kiosk hosted a game that he was prepared to talk about and demonstrate to the players who would show up to play them. At the first iteration of Game Jam, we had well over 100 people, and it's grown a little bit each year. Not just students from Wabash, but kids from the community, faculty, staff. It's a popular event. I'll talk about the screenshot you see on the left a little bit more in a minute. And then, as I mentioned, it's also resulted in the Film and Digital Media minor, which is a cross-disciplinary curricular thing. It's theater, but it's also film, music, art, creative writing. There's even a philosophy teacher, Matt Carlson, who's teaching games and using game content, particularly interactive decision-making, kind of ethical considerations, games that deal with those sorts of things in his courses. So lots of traction since Brett Douville came to campus. So I just want to pivot now to thinking about sort of what are we doing with all this, and kind of give you a picture of like why does this situate itself at Wabash so well, and why am I teaching it, and what do I have to do with any of this? So let's just make a little recipe, all right? So let's start with Shakespeare, because you always have to start with Shakespeare in the theater. And we know Shakespeare was a writer. And of course, what people understand less about Shakespeare was that he was also a director. He functioned in both ways. He wore both hats. And all the evidence we have from history in that period to suggest that in the Elizabethan period, the playwright typically took on the role of director. So he's wearing both hats. Then, of course, we'll stir in actors, right? And you got to have actors if you want to make something narrative. And of course, that's the world I've lived in from my graduate school days, from my undergraduate school days at Wabash. Okay, so then you throw in dragons and an environment where dragons can live. And you throw in this chance element, right, with dice. These elements are my convergence elements, and ultimately they are the things that help us arrive, and culturally in American history help us arrive at this fascinating phenomenon called Dungeons and Dragons, which, if you teach games, kind of all roads lead back to Dungeons and Dragons inevitably. For my purposes, the convergence, what's interesting about it is that it's essentially just live action role playing, right? And if you think about it, I mean, what is theater, which goes back to the Greeks, but live action role playing, right? Aren't we essentially just role playing? And we're doing it with an audience. Now, as you've looked at this convergence with my little this plus this plus this, you've probably noticed that there's something missing in this equation that I'm building, right? Because in fact, Dungeons and Dragons isn't theater. It's connected, but it's fundamentally different. And the fundamental pivot, the difference, of course, it's also in this picture, right? And it's that book, it's that manual, it's the rules, right? And it turns out that as we think about game design, and what I teach and what Brett taught with me when he was here, is that this experience that players have, while it does have strong, interesting connections to music, to art, and think about all the assets that have to be built for games, video games especially, there's a performative element, there's a theater element. The key difference is the systems that exist inside games, and how rules, mechanics determine how those experiences play out. And there is no analog in theater for that, or film, right? That there's no rule set for us. We memorize the lines and we perform it. And there's typically the outcome is exactly the same on Wednesday night as it is on Thursday night, unless we screw up really bad. So in the end, that's another pivotal difference, right? That the outcome is always in play, and the interactivity of the participants is also pivotally different. You could also suggest that the dungeon master, or the person who's sitting in the role of the sort of author of this experience, is in a kind of playwright director double sort of duo role, but that the process that the players interact in with him makes that relationship unlike anything that we see in any of the other arts. That the players exert a significant amount of influence on the outcome of the play and how it goes, with the guidance of the dungeon master. And that relationship is fascinating to me. And it turns out it's fascinating to some emerging playwrights who are writing a very different kind of theater experience as a result of D&D. But I don't have time to talk about that tonight. So For us at Wabash, and this is where I think you can see the convergence happen even more concretely, what we're trying to teach students is that games are systems, right? And that these systems function in very carefully designed ways. And that systems can be built to look and behave radically different from each other. As you can see in these photos, these are all interactive narrative games. They all tell stories. They all have characters that you play. They all take place in certain environments. But because they're systematically different, it's not just they tell different stories, but they're built, their mechanical systems are built differently, that the core experience you have playing Breath of the Wild, a Zelda game on the left, is designed intentionally to process and deliver a radically different experience than someone who's playing Call of Duty, even though some of the mechanical elements necessary to build those games are similar, right? So in the end, what we're able to do at Wabash, and what I'm interested in doing at Wabash, is to put students in the position of having to take ownership over this process of building a system that's self-contained and that can communicate meaning and that can be interactive. That process has 4 essential elements, and I teach this from day one. What the students are going to be doing is designing, building, testing, and iterating, and then testing and iterating again. And those last 2 become almost like a loop. Those are the core experiences that we try to deliver to the students. And as you probably are already thinking, there's nothing special about video games when it comes to those 4 elements. I mean, one could see design, build, test, iterate in professions, experiences, different disciplines, at the college, work environments, in the various professions in the world. Those 4 elements are often in play. So teaching students how to sort of harness their ability to focus on those and deliver on a deadline with an audience who's going to watch that thing work or not work, is a pretty good and pretty useful educational environment to put them in. I'll just wrap up here real quickly. That little thing you're seeing on the left is that Minecraft game at Wabash was built with the purpose of teaching the player about the history of Wabash's presidents. And you had to go explore each building and find these little plaques that would explain and present each of Wabash's presidents and the history of Wabash with biographical information on each. And then you got this little reward if you found all of them. The game on your right, that's Emilio Aguilar on the lower right. He designed a game which is above him, which is called El Otro Mexico, which is basically a game about immigration. And that game had 1 win state and 14 loss states. And it had basically to do with whether or not you live or die, or starve, or die of dehydration, or various other outcomes that you would interactively engage with based on his own experiences as a boy. So what I'm suggesting is that there's another element here at play with these designed experiences, and that is that they can be very compelling, very personal, and very, very creative. So I know I blew through a lot of stuff here. We don't have tons of time, but I tried to paint a picture of sort of what we're up to, what I'm trying to accomplish in Theater 208, and I hope it's helpful. Let's see. Should we do questions? Should we pass it over to Colin?
I guess I'm happy to pick up from here.
All right.
And maybe tell a little bit of a story and maybe a slightly different form than Michael did. So what you're looking on the screen, I've got a bunch of things loaded into my web browser. And so what you're looking at here is kind of my introduction to games, or more specifically game design. So when I was a kid, my toy of choice were Legos, and I built all kinds of stuff with them, and designed my own things and buildings and structures. And I had always also had kind of some interest in video games. I had a Nintendo when I was a kid, probably like many. But then in the sort of early 90s, a couple of games came out that maybe some of you have heard of, called Doom and Duke Nukem 3D. And Duke Nukem 3D was particularly unique because, well, and maybe Doom to some extent, but Duke 3D was unique in the sense that in addition to the game, it came with all of the tools that the developers themselves used to build the worlds that you ran around in. And I looked at this and it's like, oh my gosh, I've got Legos, but I'm no longer limited by the parts that I happen to have in my bucket. I can do whatever I want. Then I learned that there are limitations and so on. And so what you're looking at here is sort of the top-down view of one of the editor that you would get for the game, called Build. And you would make rooms and walls and stuff, and then you could go into a 3D mode and kind of preview how they were going to look. So that's kind of how I started with games, and I was always really interested in sort of the architectural aspect of it, of building my own worlds through these games. Okay, so if we flash forward many years, I was in, well, I guess a few years, it sort of culminated with what was popular at the time was, people would make their own maps, but then they would find each other online. And of course, this was before Facebook and any of these other things. And a bunch of people that I met online got together to build a whole, like basically what was called a total conversion, where we took Duke 3D and we threw out all of the art and we threw out all of the content, and we were left with just the code that ran the graphics. And we built our own stuff, our own art, our own world, our own weapons, our own story, the whole thing. And so what you're looking at here is, I know it doesn't look like a whole lot. This is part of a level that I designed, and we released this thing in like, I think it was September of 1997. And looking back on it, compared to modern games, the graphics are a bit dated, shall we say. But this particular sort of castle scene was, the archway was built by another guy, and then he had to leave the project, and so I basically had to kind of finish it. And so I added a bunch of stuff, and you go inside there and it's actually like a cathedral, and there's a big organ. But what you can't really see in the picture is that actually this is all hollow. And I figured out a way to make it so that you could go from this tower using a hidden sort of faked ladder over to this one, and kind of faking it. You had to work within the limitations of the engine to do things that it wasn't designed to do. And figuring those things out was always just really interesting to me. All right, so flash forward quite a few years. In August of 2010, I read this news story, okay, that Dr. Abbott has mentioned about Portal, this video game, being added as part of the curriculum to the Enduring Questions course, or was it C&T still at that point, Michael?
No, it was, I think, the first or second year of EQ.
Okay. And so I saw this and I thought, oh, that's really quite clever. And I read the story, and of course I had played the game and thought it was really interesting. And then I kind of filed it away in the back of my brain. Now, for reference, August of 2010, this is basically just after I finished my PhD work. And so then in 2011, or 2010, 2011, I'm on the job market looking for a new job. And I, lo and behold, see a post for math and computer science professor at Wabash College. And I'm like, Wabash, why does that name ring a bell? And then I dug into it and connected the dots. Oh yeah, that was the place that taught Portal. I'd really like to end up there. And fortunately, I ended up here. Now my training is as a mathematician, but in terms of computing, I'm sort of self-taught. I have been since I was a kid. And so when I first came here, I was basically only teaching math. I mean, that's what I was trained to do. And then for some, various reasons, sabbaticals and demands on the department, I volunteered to teach a little computer science and had a whole lot of fun with it. And when what I started teaching was sort of intro computer science, and thinking, okay, how can I teach some of the ideas of programming without getting muddled up in all of the details and all the technical stuff that makes it hard for newcomers. And one thing that we have now that we didn't, for example, when I was younger, is there are a wealth of programming languages and development environments that are designed for beginners, but they're designed for children, and they're graphically based. So you program in the same way that you might build Legos, by putting little blocks together. I mean, if I even, for example, just hit create here and make something new, right? I put little blocks together, and I don't have to worry about, did I miss a semicolon or a curly brace or any of that sort of technical mumbo jumbo. And so I sort of found these platforms and thought, this is an ideal way to teach beginners who have never programmed before in their life simple programming. And well, what's more fun than just writing a silly program that does something like balances your checkbook? Well, what about a game, right? It offers more room for creativity, and I found it's been particularly useful in an intro kind of computer science thing. So this is Scratch. I've also used Microsoft's MakeCode Arcade. You actually can do some programming within Minecraft. So there's an educational edition of it that also supports one of these block code things that my guys in CS 101 are doing right now. And then last semester, I had the opportunity to teach an experimental course, and I'm going to be doing a sort of second iteration of it here next semester, using actual real tools. So what you're seeing here is a video, basically a demo reel of what's possible to create in Unreal Engine. And you look at this and you think this is Hollywood level stuff. This is from the latest, action Marvel movie or whatever. And in the movie industry, right, this stuff is all pre-rendered, and you watch it, you're not watching it live, you're basically watching a replay of it. That's not what you're seeing here. Everything that was in that video is rendered live by computer hardware, and it looks basically Hollywood quality. It's just amazing what you can do. Now, my students weren't producing stuff quite that good, obviously. I mean, you need to develop something like this, you need a team of artists and software people and whatnot, but they were using the same tools that some AAA game studios use. Okay. And so I guess maybe the last thing I want to mention is, for me, game design has always been about the technical stuff. That's what I really get into. And yeah, I appreciate a good story and good graphics and good, immersiveness, but the technical stuff is what really excites me. And that takes me to my first love, or how I was introduced to computers. So some of you may recognize that I've got a kind of couple of old things sitting over here on my desk. In particular, does anybody recognize this little guy? So that's a Commodore 64. It was released in 1982 by the Commodore Business Corporation. That happens to be the same year I was born. So this computer was the first computer I ever used as a child. And my first memories of learning how to read and numbers and things like that were playing this silly little Muppets game that my dad had found for it. I've since bought one I found on eBay and played it, and it was just like 2-year-old me, this flood of memories coming back that I didn't even know were there. But in the course of teaching a lot of more advanced computer science, ended up teaching machine organization, architecture, real low-level kind of programming stuff. And so what you're actually seeing here kind of in the middle is the code that's making the thing on the right work. And this is assembly language code, which is probably the driest possible way you could ever program a computer. But ultimately, this is as close to the level of the ones and zeros that humans can get. And so next semester, I'm going to be teaching a course on 8-bit retro computing. And my students are going to program games for the Commodore 64 and maybe, hopefully, the old 8-bit Nintendo, which actually use the same processor, believe it or not. So it's sort of and so me getting to know Michael, both before I even, came to Wabash, and then since we've been doing stuff, is, we're hoping to next semester have some sort of cross-class collaboration between his guys and my guys. And if nothing more, we're going to have a really awesome game jam in May or April, whenever it is, because we're going to have guys coming at game design from very different perspectives. So I would say maybe one other thing to go back to what Michael said about the loop of game design is about you build something, you test something. What was you iterate? What was the fourth thing, Michael? Design, build, test, iterate.
Yeah, you deploy it and
Okay.
then you iterate. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's exactly in the technical side of game design what you do. And if I go back, for example, to something like Unreal Engine. If you're trying to design an environment like this, it doesn't end up this beautiful instantly. You start with a very blocky, gray, just kind of shell, and then you iterate over that and start to add detail as you go. And the best way that I think I can describe this, and I do to my students, is that what you're really doing is following what we all hope and we train our students to do with the writing process, right? You just get something down on the paper, and then you read it, and you revise it, and you read it again, and you revise that. And you're not turning in the thing that you wrote the night before it's due. That's garbage, right? That's not how good writing, really serious editing goes. And the game design world, when you say it in game design context, the guys are like, oh yeah, well, of course I would do it that way. But then you say, okay, well, how many of you guys did this approach the last time you had to write a paper in one of your humanities classes? And they all sort of like sheepishly hide under their desks. But it's really the same thing. And in engineering, so one of the other courses I'm teaching this semester is a freshman tutorial on rocketry. Spacex, for example, uses this motif. They try something, build it. Yeah, it might blow up, and that's okay. We'll pick up the pieces from the desert, figure out why it blew up, and fix it, and try it again. And if it blows up again, it happens. And so that sort of rapid prototyping is something that in the engineering world is becoming more viable, partly because advanced fabrication techniques, 3D printers and whatnot, allow you to do it that quickly. But this sort of iterative design process is really, I would say, universal. It's not just a game thing, and it's not just on the artistic side. It's not just on the technical side. It's all over the place. So I'll stop sharing my screen here, and that's what I had to share with everybody. Oh, the Oregon Trail, yes. Yeah, I can't tell you how many oxen I've drowned trying to ford that freaking river. So.
I think the Colin's point about failure and how important and necessary it is, and how we tend to want to hide it traditionally, especially with writing. When I watch a student crash and burn in a paper, it happens on my desk quietly. I would never think of bringing that paper to class and like publicly shaming him by reading it out loud. but in a certain way, there's actually something probably kind of useful about that. And in the world that we live in now, the one Colin's describing, the kind of game design work we do, that crash and burn has to happen publicly. It can't happen any other way. So there is something really
you
useful.
are your own, I mean, in some sense, you are your own worst critic, in the sense that you can't be truly critical of your own work.
Yeah.
Right. And I could make something that I think looks great, and then I have somebody look at it and they're like, that's crap. You just have to be willing to take that.
We're happy to answer questions or comments or feedback, suggestions.
Not a question, but that last statement about, at Wabash, I was an art major and I'm now an architect. But one of the things that I learned at Wabash, being an art major, that a lot of my fellow architecture students when I was in grad school didn't understand, is that once you put something in front of someone, you have no control over it anymore. Because everyone has their own sensibilities. They're going to come to it with whatever their backgrounds are. So you just need to, like you just said, you just need to let that part of it from yourself go and just put it out there and just kind of take what you can take from a positive standpoint, but just let it go. Just remove yourself from it, and it's there to be viewed by the audience.
You learned that as an art major.
Yeah, as an art major. Theater minor, by the way, also.
Yeah. You were here just a little before I got back, so yeah. I'm afraid we didn't. We weren't here at the same time.
Yeah, we didn't have an art major when I was at Wabash, and so I had to be an art minor. So it's interesting that games has replaced that now as a minor. But yeah, I am struck by the similarity of the game development, and probably even in many ways, a lot of the software that we use to develop buildings now and do design real time, and its comparison to how the games work and the creation of an environment. And then we have to put the brakes on at some point, and then it becomes an instruction set to teach somebody else how to build it.
And I'll mention there, you know, Unreal Engine has, it's being used in a lot of industries besides games. It's being used in film, it's being used in the auto industry, it's being used in the architectural industry. And I think it was earlier in the semester, we had some of the architect people from Shepley Bullfinch, which is a design group that is working on sort of reimagining what Sparks, the Sparks Center and the library look like. And I was talking with one, they had like a foam, you know, kind of mock-up of some ideas they were playing around with. I'm like, do you guys have like a Viz group that's doing like Unreal Engine stuff? And they're like, oh yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll get you in contact. So yeah, it's really kind of interesting to see how, you know, because Unreal as a game engine really fundamentally started for making games, and to see it having blossomed since 1998 when the first version of it came out has been kind of fascinating.
And I guess I could pile on here, as I feel like one of the guinea pigs for the freshman tutorial video game class and the class with Brett Duville is something I take with me every day, and have been fortunate enough to work with Google Stadia and Epic Games, who makes the Unreal Engine, over the past couple of years, to take some of that knowledge that was bestowed upon you guys into that field. And that being said as well, Dr. McKinney, if you do need some Commodore games, I can send some your way.
What, it looks like you got a cartridge there too. Is that an ultimate cartridge?
I got that's a VIC 20, and I got
oh wow, yeah,
as well. So
yeah, okay.
Dr. Abbott probably say that's nothing new. So
well, it's definitely true, and I know, Colin, you've experienced this. You sometimes you're not sure whether anything you did really mattered. That you had sort of a plan, but the students that you had that semester, Tyler's class, that group of guys, I mean, they were pivotal. Would it have gone as well with a different group? Maybe not. Maybe I would have lost all my enthusiasm for it. I don't know. but that you remember, Tyler, that was just a really special group of guys. Austin, you remember. You know, there's just sometimes you get the right collection of guys and it's magic.
It was a great semester, so I remember a lot of it. And I still have my my PlayStation that has my Game Jam project on it too. So still, I'll pull it out every once in a while.
I had a student send me a list of quotes that occurred during Tom and Kyle's version of the tutorial and all of the crazy things that were said in that class. This guy sent me a little journal of about 50 of the top choice quotes. He was writing all of them down all semester long. And I just read them and thought, wow, you know, that was quite a semester. And those guys were really clever.
So
I
Alan,
do need to ask too, what games are you guys playing right now? Can't end the conversation without asking that.
oh, well, finals are in a week and a half, so none. No, seriously, been playing some Dyson Sphere program lately. Let's see what else. The Diablo 2 Resurrected, to get back into it. Yeah, that's been the stuff lately.
It's like we
Yeah,
had
I'm
sorry.
playing Animal Crossing with my daughter a lot. And I'm playing a game called Atelier Ryza, which is an RPG. And I'm playing, what else? I kind of put down a couple games that I started just out of curiosity. The new Horizon Zero Dawn has come out for the PC, and I didn't play it on the PS4, and that's a terrific game. Great environments in that game. Great story, actually. Great female lead in that. So yeah, there's someone up to.
So Alan Hadfield, you got a question?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Can
can.
people hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. I'm in the class of 1968, and a shout out to Al Hart, who's in my fraternity, Kep Sig. But the point is, this is very fascinating to me, and the reason why I joined in, because it's very clear that the convergence of software, computing, AI is leading everybody everywhere. When we took the first computer at Wabash College was some sort of a Fortran. It was a 1 hour
IBM 1620 that we got secondhand from Purdue.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me just say, we were using those little cards, and it was such a frustrating thing to me. I might have been the pledge trainer at the time, but I think I had a pledge write the program just so I could get the thing over with and leave. But I did want to say, in this gaming world and so forth, because I have grandchildren who are in the gaming world to an extremely large extent. And I would like to know how many souls are lost as they come up through their teaching to over gaming or under gaming, or do they all kind of find their way in a certain way? He is certainly brilliant, but I took him to play golf, and the golf coach said, this person has no interest in anything athletic, completely not. So just let him game on. Maybe a comment about this, because we are aware of these people that just play games all the time. Thank you.
Yeah, it can be addicting. And I think this is why I have a rule for myself on games. And I, tell my students about it, that so I do not play massively multiplayer online games like World of Warcraft or Star Trek Online or things like that, because of the time suck that they involve. And I had a period where I played that a little bit during graduate school, and it was disastrous. And I had to realize that no, this is not a good thing. Yeah, I mean, I've heard of guys whose GPAs do a nosedive when they discover World of Warcraft. And you know, those games, and also free to play games that are mostly on mobile devices now, you know, are in some sense designed to be as deliberately addictive as possible. And you know, it's a different kind of high than doing a drug, for example. But yeah, no, it's a real thing. Maybe Michael, you've got thoughts about that too.
I really don't. I'm not sure. I do believe that it has the potential to be a problem for some people, but I'm not sure I'm convinced that it's necessarily any more problematic than any number of other obsessions one could, you know, sink your time into. Yeah, I do think that we have a long history of becoming very culturally worried about certain things as they come along. People used to be freaked out about movies. When movies came along, they were the ruination of America's youth, like rock and roll was. I do think we worry about these things maybe too much, but I don't mean to diminish, you know, there are definitely people who become addicted, but I'm not convinced that it's had a terrible impact.
Eric Rowland, you were next, and then Tom, you'll be after.
Yeah, I was just going to ask Michael about the, he had like a screenshot of what looked like an old adventure game on his presentation a while back, and I didn't hear him talk about that at all. But that was, you know, back in the day, how I got introduced to gaming was on a TRS-80 and playing those.
Did you play any of those Infocom games?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
We would spend hours doing it, and you know, you're just kind of trying to guess at what the words are you're supposed to type back in for the next step and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it was I didn't know what if that was,
it was
just
a game that
history
actually,
these days.
It was a student written game. There's a really cool engine, it's free, called Twine. I think a lot of the guys here who have had my class used it. It's very easy to use, but it allows you to create a text-based interactive adventure just like Infocom. In fact, more powerful than Infocom because the engine's a little bit more capable. But yeah, you can guide your reader through a series of experiences where the narrative branches based on the choices of the reader player, and then the student has to write out all those possible narrative paths. And if he's smart, he may figure out a way to have them converge back so that he can, you know, get back on track. But it's a challenge, a writing challenge, and I think a fun one for students.
I bet it is. That would be interesting.
Tom Blage.
Yeah, and before I go on to the point that I raised my hand for, I did a final project for my Abbott once where I used Twine to write a game, and I spent an entire week on Christmas break. I think I wrote like 115,000 words and made my grade project for like 3 weeks. It's a very powerful, very cool tool, and I think I still have like a 1.5 gigabyte file on a desktop somewhere from that. But what I wanted to talk about was that point about, you know, can you play too many games? Because, you know, I think when I grew up, I'm 27, and I think I had that feeling a little bit as a kid. I mean, I look over at my other computer and I look at my Steam library, and I currently own 1,200 games because I have a problem. But I don't think it ever negatively impacted me, right? Like, I think in college I don't know if I saw anybody drop out because of video games, but I saw, you know, a couple guys drop out because they wanted to party or stay at home and watch Netflix and not go to class. I think we can sometimes talk about games like that. There is a balance you have to find by yourself at a certain level where, like, you know, I have a job now and I can't just play games all day, but it's a good way for me to relax and connect with friends, especially now in COVID times where I can hop on Discord or TeamSpeak or something like that and sit and play games with my friends that live all over the country and just say, hey, Tell me about your day. What's going on? How can we do this? And I think over time, especially from when I was a teenager to now, games have become much more collaborative in that way, where when I was 13 years old and I rented Fallout 3 for the first time and played 13 hours in one weekend, that might have been excessive. But now that I live alone and my best friend, moved back to Indiana after grad school, I can sit down with him and play a game for 2 hours and get a chance to connect with a friend in a way that I might not be able to otherwise. And it gives us an excuse to do that. I think when we're kids, we always have that, go outside, do this kind of stuff. But I think, 99.999% of the time, it's not truly a problem. It's just, something that's captured our interest because of the ways in which we can interact with worlds that aren't our own. And we can create our own adventures in which we can connect with people across the world. And I think it worked out well for me. I'm not going to say it's never a bad thing, but I think with a bit of an open mind towards it, you can have some really great outcomes from it.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Tom, that we have parents who don't let their students bring any of their gaming consoles with them to college. And I get that. I mean, I understand, especially if the parents feels like that first year is pivotal. They got to think about the studies and everything. But I think some students would do well to have a little bit more meaningful recreation time. My worry sometimes at Wabash is we get so nose to the grindstone that I watch kids burn out, and they really are grinding it out. And sometimes I just want to put my arm around them and say, hey man, like just take a little break. Maybe something to put your mind on some other activity would be good. You don't necessarily have to go get drunk, just like maybe engage your brain on something else. Wabash is hard. Everybody in the room knows it.
Bob Nisker, question? Need to unmute.
Yeah, you're muted, Bob. Who had that on their bingo card?
Yeah, unmute. Here we go. Sorry.
There you go.
I just want to say I'm extremely pleased to see the cross-discipline effort still at Wabash. I'm sorry I missed this the last few years of what you've been doing, but where Colin mentioned the 1620 IBM, that was still operational in the basement when I got there, but it was the RISC-to-C time-sharing system on the PDP-11 that actually got me to Wabash. The first time I'd ever seen interactive computing. And in the FISI group that I was in, my partner, one of my roommates and I coded up a spades card game that you could play between the various terminals on the campus. And that's when we started to see people that would just sit at a terminal and play with someone else and weren't in the same room. It was fascinating. And that led directly, because of that experience of that interactive computing at different locations around the campus, at least, in the early days of dial-out modems. I realized that, boy, if you could dial into a computer, you could do the same thing like we had the computer at Wabash. And a partner and I started an early interactive gaming company right after graduation that was doing the dial-up modems into a remote mini computer, way ahead of its time. It was a niche system, but it was directly that cross-disciplinary stuff at Wabash. I was a physics major, had access to a computer system, but also the chemistry people, the philosophy people, the cultures and traditions was just starting my sophomore year. And so getting that cross-discipline look and to see Wabash carrying that transition forward is great. I have grandkids now that say, Grandpa, can you come and play Minecraft? And, sure. So I fire it up and we go in. So I've stayed pretty competent with the interactive computing over the years, but I'd give Wabash gold stars for probably having me able to experience that interactive computing location, at least on the campus, long before the internet itself became that communications mechanism that allowed you to tie together. And so standalone computing is interesting to me in standalone gaming, but to me, the interactive or that interacting through the world rules, like you said, in a gaming bar, that's really fascinating still. It's exciting. I'm glad Wabash is still on top of this.
Let's see, we're nearing 8:30 or just turned to 8:30. Maybe have time for one more question. If somebody has something.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah, go ahead, Phil.
So I see a lot of talk about the gaming design, which is interesting, and the programming and things, but I think there's a lot more to the gaming industry than what we've seen in this discussion so far. I don't do any gaming. I kind of quit somewhere around Minesweeper, not Minecraft, as it was a time kill when I was living in Saudi Arabia and really needed a way to kill time other than brewing homemade wine. Anyway, that's another story for another forum. But what I do is a lot of voice work for video production, including gaming, and I also see some of the business side of it. And if we look at the business numbers, that's something unto itself, where we take an intangible item such as this game, this series of code, and sell it to people around the world. I'm curious to know how the Wabash curriculum addresses that aspect of game development and how to commercialize and monetize it, as well as the other aspects of production, animation being one, storyline or logistics being another, but also that basic TV, theater, film production aspect of getting music and rights or making your own music, doing voice actors, doing perhaps animated the stuff where they put the suit on and the video follows you. There are a lot of aspects to it. I've had the privilege of working in some of them, but where does the curriculum go beyond what we've talked about so far? And I'd be happy to hear your comments.
There's one, I mean, I can tell you about one course that we're offering for the first time this spring in January. It's a music course. I'm in the music department now, interestingly. It's called Music and Sound Design for Theater and Film. And of course, gaming would be a part of that as well. And what it is essentially a course that is tapping into a big student interest in making beats, making soundtracks, writing original music for film. I'm teaching a tutorial. My current tutorial is on scoring for film, and my guys are about to submit their final projects, which is 2 minutes of film scored or with original sound or music that they've composed or looped or whatever. So that's I mean, we run into personnel issues. You know, how many people do we have? How many hands on deck do I have to put like body sensors on students and create an environment where we're recording mocap stuff? That's really not feasible for us at this point, but we are pretty well equipped to do sound and music design, and all of that's digital. All of that's, you know, using DAWs and systems that you know, you export your stems and you send it to a producer. Our guys want to learn how to do that, and we'll be doing it next semester.
Yeah, so I'll add maybe a couple of things, which is, you know, Michael and I have talked about this, and we're not the only two people interested in game related stuff here, but there's, I think, some opportunity for growth. I mean, so for example, the tools that you use to build worlds in, you know, Unreal Engine or whatever are similar in some respects to the CAD design software that you might use in a variety of things, from you know, engineering and making parts and things like that to actual artistry and making sort of the digital assets that go into a game. I can do the architectural stuff. I can't, you know, if you told me to animate a person, it'd be all over, right? There's a reason I ended up in math and computing, is because that part of the artist part of my brain is just not non-functional. So yeah, I think we've got some opportunities to go there. Then on the commercial side of things, I mean, I think this is something where there's so many aspects to the commercial part of games, and this is where I think the live humanely part is something that we need to incorporate even in courses where it may not seem directly relevant. You if anybody's been following the news recently about the game industry, I mean, there's been a lot of cases that have come to light recently, although a lot of this stuff has been very ongoing, of just reprehensibly toxic work environments that game designers are being subjected to, and just all kinds of abuse of human resources in terms of long working hours, sexual harassment, people getting drunk and doing stupid things. I mean, all of that has happened, and I think this reminds me that even though I'm teaching code most of the day, that we need to take steps back and think, it's at the end of the day, it's people that are writing this, and you have to teach people well. Yeah.
Thank you. By the way, I'm reading comments as well in the chat. I'm sorry we didn't acknowledge those sooner, but these are, I hope everyone's reading these. These are really cool.
Yeah, and Tom Blades, to your point about having cross group classes, I mean, one of my long-term visions for how things could end up is I imagine sort of like a game design work like studio almost, where we've got, say, 10 students that are in the computing course, and 10 students that are in the theater course, and 10 students that are in the art course, and 10 students are in the music course. And then you take one or two guys from each of these sort of sub-disciplines and throw them together and say, okay, you guys are a design group, and you're going to make a game, and your artist is going to make the art, and your programmer is going to do the programming, and you're going to all kind of come together and do it. But that, guys would be coming into it from different angles. I think Michael and I are going to try to experiment gently with some cross-class collaboration. I've done it once before, between a CS class and a technical writing class, with some success and definitely some non-success. I think we've got some work to do to get our feet wet there and do it right, so that it's a positive experience for both parties.
I mean, that sounds fascinating. I know I really enjoyed the process when we did that in 1X, both on the acting side and the directing side, because I took both those classes, and getting to experience that and having to work together. And in a lot of ways, it teaches you a lot more about, I spent the last 5 years working in software. And when you go into that and you're working with a developer on a design, you have to say, hey, can you review this design and tell me what's going on? And can you test this? And can you communicate this to an end user? You're not just you sitting in a room, making something, publishing something, and carrying it all the way through. Well, I love that, view of the passion project in a lot of ways, like you were just mentioning earlier, about like games as a business. Unfortunately, that isn't always the case, where it's one person putting in all their time and their effort. It is a business where people are, being salaried and working hours and working together. And that experience, learning to work with people and compromise and come to a shared vision and communicate those ideas clearly to each other, is, I think, super important. And I think that also helps to set those boundaries and kind of ease you into that idea of what working collaboratively in software and stuff like that is, which could be an end goal for these kids coming out of Wabash.
Yeah, everything you said is spot on. I think those of you who are my age or around that time, went to Wabash back in the day, I think that is the biggest change at Wabash from those days, is how interdisciplinary and cross-disciplinary we are. We didn't used to be nearly like that. But I will say, for what it's worth, I think the energy to do that, the students have a lot of energy, and a lot of the faculty do. We're still figuring out, we're still a very conservative institution, institutionally. You've got your 3 courses that you need to teach, and you're in this department, and these departments have a department chair, and they work in these very old-fashioned structures. And sometimes that doesn't lend itself well to figuring out how Colin and I can teach together. And when he's in Division 1 and I'm in Division 2, it's actually harder than you might think.
One of the things we've been doing in the real world, I'm talking to you from Warsaw, Poland, by the way, where I've lived for the last 30 years, is to integrate in one of the companies I work with, history and gaming or education and gaming, to teach and use gaming as a motivational means to teach, whether it's historical content, language content, what have you. And looking at it from that aspect, of course, commercial doesn't necessarily mean end user pays, but could mean that there's a some type of educational demand or some type of educational calling for some content. And it may be worthwhile considering that aspect as well.
Thank you for that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so this reminds me, and I may not have the details right, but I do have a memory that Dan Rogers in Spanish had his students, they had to play Minecraft together and only speak Spanish while they were doing it. And maybe that's an apocryphal story, but I think it'd be really fun to, to do that and throw a Spanish class and say, okay, you guys have to play, what is it?
Don't starve.
No, not don't starve.
Stop
Keep talking and nobody explodes.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. Where, the manual, the bomb diffuser manual is in English, but you can only speak French back and forth or something, would be, kind of hilarious, but also really, really instructive. Yeah. And I think there are so many intersections between using games as a vehicle for doing other things where, history or games, maybe, in a more general sense of like being able to explore the Parthenon or the Colosseum without actually having to fly to Italy to do it. Minecraft in some sense has been, very powerful in that sort of sense because people have done, I mean, like the one student Michael showed, building the campus or other major buildings in that. And I'll maybe add one other thing, which is the education edition of Minecraft. One thing that I've been really impressed with Microsoft, who of course owns it, that they've done is in their educational resources, it's not just all programming. There's stuff about culture and language and history and whatnot that all use Minecraft. So it's not, and there may be, I think, one of the better examples of it and of trying to leverage their platform to teach in a variety of disciplines and a variety of subjects and not just the technical stuff.
Well, great. I'd like to thank our presenters tonight, Drs. Abbott and Dr. McKinney. Appreciate you so much for taking your time to do that. I know it's really busy time of the year for you all with classes ending and finals coming up. So thank you so much. Thank you everyone for your participation tonight. Look for future wherever Wabash events. If you go to wabash.edu/www, you can see all of the activities and events that we have planned. This presentation or this call was recorded. There will be that recording available through that website soon.
And if anybody's got some old Commodore hardware or something like that, I'd be happy to buy it. Or you get a tax-free tax write-off because Wabash is a 501c3. Give me an email.
There you go.
We'll get in contact with Dr. McKinney.
All right, cool.
Thank you all so much. Have a great evening.